the tropics, mangoes actually don't really receive much cold weather, so they flower off of drought stress. But here in Florida, we get drought, but it's nowhere near as dry as it is in other parts of the tropical world. So we're very dependent on cold fronts. And we got some cold weather in the beginning part of December. It wasn't a lot, it was only about a week, maybe slightly more than that, but that cool weather was enough to ignite bloom on a lot of mango trees, not just here in South Florida, but also throughout the state. And so a lot of trees by the end of December of this last year and the beginning of January were already starting to flower. And unfortunately for our friends in other parts of Florida, those flowers were starting to open up while the weather got real cold during January. And when there's really cold weather, a few things happen. And when I'm talking about really cold weather, I'm talking about temperatures in the 40s and even the 30s Fahrenheit. So when that happens, certain mangoes will come out with disproportionately male flowers. That's a big problem because male flowers cannot make fruit, only the hermaphroditic flowers can make fruit. So a lot of people with mango trees saw their trees bloom and open up all these flowers and expected to get fruit. Maybe they were in Orlando or Tampa or the west coast of Florida, and they're expecting to get a crop from these flowering trees, and then all the flowers dried up. And some of them maybe thought that they had disease like last year, but what actually happened was their trees just made overwhelmingly male flowers, and certain varieties are just known to do that. The carrying mango, which is originally from Palm Beach County, is notorious for making way too many male flowers if the weather is a little too chilly for it. Now another thing that happens is when temperatures drop too low, you'll start to see basically a lot of embryo abortion. So like they will set fruit sometimes and then drop the fruit that they set because the seed does not survive, the embryo does not survive, and it dies, and then the fruit just drops off. So you'll see little mangoes set on certain trees, and it doesn't keep any of them because it just got a little bit too cold for the embryos inside. And then below 40 degrees or so, pollen viability starts to get impacted as well. So the pollen doesn't adhere right and doesn't work right. So this combination of factors resulted that in a lot of parts of Florida, that early bloom didn't really amount to anything. But here in Palm Beach County, we have developing fruit on our trees, on some of our trees, that are already about this big from that bloom that occurred at the end of January, or end of December rather, and in January. But fortunately for everybody else that did not see fruit materialize from that bloom, a second bloom happened in February because we got a lot of cold weather during the month of January. We only had a few days where the nighttime low was above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you can get multiple weeks where the nighttime low is dropping below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 15 degrees Celsius, you are likely to see a lot of bloom activity from the trees. And so across Florida, everybody experienced lots of cold weather in January that resulted in the February bloom. And fortunately for those folks, February was quite warm for most of Florida. And so now most of the developing fruit and opening, there's still opening flowers on a lot of people's trees. And we still have trees that are continuing to bloom. I expect with some of the cool nights we're still experiencing, we will probably see some more bloom this month. So we have these really prolonged bloom periods now. And it's wonderful for stretching out the mango season. It's not so fun when you have to spray them. Even though I should be grateful that we're still seeing bloom, it's kind of frustrating on some level because I'm still out there having to take care of the flowers. What's up?
What do you mean when you have to spray them?
Well, I mentioned how powdery mildew wiped out the mango crop last year. So mango is, unfortunately, for as great of a tasting fruit as it is, it's one of the most fungal prone fruits, at least in the tropical world. And so to prevent those diseases from wiping out the mango crop, or at least restricting it severely, there's measures that we can take in terms of applying products to the flowers and the fruits to prevent those fungal diseases. And there's organic products that can be used to do that, and there's synthetic products that can be used to do that, but regardless of what you choose to use, if you're willing to spray your trees when they're in the flowering and fruiting process, you can ensure to a much higher degree that you'll actually get a crop from them. So, and some years it's more crucial than others. So this year, I talked about powdery mildew. We're seeing a lot less powdery mildew across Florida, based on the reports that we're getting from other people and what we're seeing on our own trees, okay? Now, we do spray to control powdery mildew, and there's different products that you can use to keep it from becoming an issue. But if you are gonna grow mangoes, I say one of the biggest priorities you should have is controlling powdery mildew or selecting varieties that can fruit through it. So last year was a big reminder, a kick in the butt, if you will, for anybody growing mangoes, that you have to take disease and fungus seriously. You have to expect disease to happen, even if it doesn't happen. You have to plan as if it's going to. And so we, at our farm in West Palm Beach, up the road here, we act like disease is going to be an issue every single year. We assume it's going to occur, and we take measures to make sure that it doesn't hurt us. And so last year, even though everyone was getting wrecked by powdery mildew, we barely had any, because we applied sulfur every single week to keep it from happening in the first place. Now, if you don't want to use sulfur, you can use other products. There's products like horticultural oils can assist in keeping powdery mildew under control. There's products like potassium bicarbonate, also known as millstop, and there's probably some other names, but that works as well. We like sulfur because it's cheap and it's organic, but there's other options. And regardless, you really just need to choose one of these products and stick with them and apply them with some degree of frequency. So we apply them every 7 to 10 days while the trees are still flowering, before up to the point that they've set their fruit. Once they've set their fruit, they're usually in the clear zone, at least when it comes to powdery mildew. Now, there's other fungi and diseases that attack mango, and this year in January, I mentioned how a lot of people lost a lot of their January crop, if you will, their January bloom fruit. Part of it was because of the aforementioned issues, but part of it was we got a week around January 20th where there was quite a bit of rain, and that rain contributed to a lot of anthracnose fungus on the mangoes. We got reports from across the state about this. Growers and backyarders alike were complaining about anthracnose. So even though last year powdery mildew was the big problem, anthracnose did occur last year, and especially in humid areas. But we saw anthracnose even in the coastal zone where we don't always see it, because this rain lasted for like 4 or 5 days, and it was very overcast, and the soil and the trees just couldn't dry out. And so we even saw some anthracnose at our farm in areas where we missed fungicide applications on the trees. So anthracnose was a big problem on that early blooming stuff. Now it's been relatively dry in February and the early part of March. And so there's been a little bit of rain, but nothing like we saw during that week of January 20th. And so this bloom that's been emerging since has not been impacted by anthracnose as much for most of the folks growing mangoes. So,
so applying the fungicide, the copper, won't help you if it's raining, right? So.
Well, if it's raining, it's kind of hard to apply a fungicide, right? But if you applied it before it started raining, okay, and you used a surfactant or a wetting agent, then a lot of times the product will continue to adhere through the rain. And we do use surfactant, and it makes a big difference because I can still see the product residue even after torrential rain. So it kind of depends on how you're applying your product and what you're applying, because certain products last longer, especially certain kinds of copper will stick longer than other kinds of copper, from what I've observed, but and as well as other fungicides for that matter. But yeah, it makes a difference. Now, if it's raining and you're wanting to spray something, forget it. product's not going to adhere if everything's wet. You have to wait until the rain's over and then wait for everything to dry out too. And another thing to take into consideration is a lot of people like to spray in the mornings. The issue with that is if the trees are covered in dew, you've still got an issue with getting the product to adhere to the flowers and small fruits and the leaves. Yeah?
I don't know why this is new to me, like fruit trees, because I'm from 9B up north, and we don't have as many fruits as y'all.
Sure.
But I am a permaculturist and very concerned, and I'm hearing a lot of spraying.
Yes.
Is there no one else concerned about their eating this stuff?
Well, it's certainly something that you should take into consideration. And you don't have to spray your trees. You can certainly grow mangoes without spraying, and if so, my recommendation would be to focus on varieties that have really good natural disease resistance. And there's quite a few nowadays, quite a few options that are available that have very good natural disease resistance. And it's if you're going to be planting new mango trees, I highly recommend having a few that have enough natural disease resistance to fruit through disease, high disease pressures, even if you're not going to be applying anything.
But fungal and bacterial things that arise in soil and on trees arise because there's a problem. So what that tells me, without a lot of experience with fruit trees, is if there's powdery mildew growing, there's something upset in the balance of the microbiome. So these trees that are getting disease, are they getting disease in food forests, or are they getting disease when we are monocropping and trying to grow?
They're getting disease in general. Certain varieties, certain cultivars of mangoes are more prone to powdery mildew than others. Some just don't get it. It's kind of like how certain people are allergic to cats and certain people aren't. And certain people have various food allergies and some people don't. And a lot of that has to do with just your genetic makeup, unfortunately. And so certain mangoes, I'll give you a few examples, like pickering, for example, is one that I frequently recommend to people. They can handle anthracnose, they can handle powdery mildew, they can handle bacterial black spot, no problem. And then a variety like the Gary mango, you take it to a humid area and it's getting everything on the list. Even if you try to control it sometimes. So it's just kind of their genetic makeup, and some of them have better natural disease resistance than others would be the best explanation I can give you. But you don't have to think that if you're going to grow mangoes that you have to necessarily spray something to be successful. And there's definitely, I could give you a list of stuff that would work great even if you weren't doing anything to your trees. It depends on your location, okay? But like, you can just plant them and forget about them, and maybe you won't get like tons and tons of production, but still get fruit most years. And that's, unless you're selling the fruit, that's kind of the goal, right? You just want to get some to enjoy and maybe share with your family. So anyway, continuing on. So this season we had a very strong bloom through most of the state, and the disease pressures aren't as high, and my expectation is that we are going to have a very good mango crop in Florida in 2025. A very good mango crop. And it's exciting, right? Especially after a year like last year. It's really terrific. And now we've got people growing mangoes in parts of Florida, and I've been talking about this for years. We've got people growing mangoes in parts of Florida that we never dreamed they could grow mangoes, because now it's warm enough and we don't freeze as frequently as we used to, and it's really expanded the growing territory and geography of the mango. And that's really wonderful from the perspective of those of us that really love the mango. We want to see more people growing them. And so now a lot of these small farms that have been started just in the last 3, 4, 5 years, their trees are going to be coming online this year, and they're going to see probably pretty good crops. So there's going to be abundance of fruit in Florida this year, and it's going to be great for consumers and people that are new to mangoes and want to learn about them and try different varieties. It's a very exciting time. And so, as some of you know, and I already mentioned, we're going to be having a Florida Mango Festival this summer. It's going to be June 29th at the Palm Beach County Convention Center. in the city of West Palm Beach. Now last year we did the festival here at the Mounds Botanical Garden, and we were grateful that they hosted us. We cooperated with the UF IFAS Extension Office with making that festival a reality, and it was great, but we were kind of limited in terms of how many people we could have because of the capacity of the venue. You know, it was our first year doing it, and we had so many people that wanted to go and couldn't, and that really didn't sit well with us. It didn't sit well with us or the other growers or the vendors that participated. We wanted anybody that wanted to come and experience Florida mangoes to be able to do so. You know, and then there's the issue of holding an event in the summer here in South Florida with the brutal heat and humidity. It's rough, and we had a thunderstorm last year during the event. And traditionally, you know, or at least in modern times, mango festivals have been held outside and they can be quite miserable and uncomfortable. But back in the day, when the Florida Mango Forum held their conventions in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they knew better and they would hold them indoors. And then unfortunately that organization went into decline and eventually disappeared. But they had pretty good attendance at these events that they held, and they would hold them in hotels and auditoriums and stuff like that. So we thought, well, what if we borrowed that idea and tried doing a mango festival in the comfort of air conditioning and the protection of a building so that we weren't exposed to the elements, to thunderstorms and rain and so forth. And we're gonna see how it goes, but I'm very optimistic for it. So June 29th, it's gonna be, I guess, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're going to try to involve as many small growers from across our great state, as many nurseries as we can that specialize in selling mango trees, and other people that will have products, things like jams and jellies and sauces and stuff like that. If it's connected to mangoes somehow, some way, we want them involved. So if you're watching us or listening, if you are interested in volunteering at our event, or if you are interested in participating as a vendor, reach out to us. We're on Facebook now, so just look for Florida Mango Fest. We're going to have a website up this coming week, and we're going to have tickets available to the event pretty soon as well. But we're really excited about the venue opportunity, myself and the other growers that are planning this. So I've been working with Chris and Paul and Vince in trying to get this thing going, and we're all putting a lot of work into it, and we're really excited about the feedback we're getting from people. It's going to be a tremendous learning opportunity. I feel like when people get together and talk, you learn a lot of knowledge that you might not otherwise find. And so we're going to have educational talks and lectures about mangoes. We're going to have a masterful display. Last year we had almost 200 varieties. Can you believe that? Almost 200 varieties were on display, locally sourced, in a terrible mango year. And imagine what we can do in a good one. So there's going to be vendors selling their fruit, sampling their fruit. There's going to be a scion exchange, hopefully, where people can trade scions from their trees. We're going to have an ID your mango booth. At least that's the plan for people that don't know what kind of mango they have in their yards, and they just want somebody to tell them what kind it is, maybe, or at least give them some suggestions and possibilities. And we'd like to do some kind of program where people can submit seedling mangoes for evaluation. If they know that this mango they have is not a cultivated variety, a named variety, and are confident that it's a new seedling, if you will, we would like to be able to evaluate it. That's how it was done back in the 30s and 40s and 50s when the Mango Forum was active. They had a variety committee where people submitted their seedlings for evaluation by professionals in the industry, and if they had a good enough qualities and traits, they got named and publicized. And that's how we got varieties like Glen and Kent and Kit and so forth. Tommy Atkins got rejected by the Mango Forum, actually, but it still made its way into the commercial trade somehow. But anyway, we would like to have something like that for this event and events in the future where we can discover new varieties and share them with the world. So anyway, those are some of the activities and things that are going to be happening at the Florida Mango Festival, and I hope you'll all be a part of it. Anyway, beyond that, that covers a lot of what I wanted to talk about, but anthracnose on the blossoms. You can use a few different things. If you want to be organic, there's some good bio products like Actinovate, and there's another one called Double Nickel 55. You can rotate those with a copper. Depends on what kind of copper you want to use. A lot of the ones at stores are on the weaker side.
Do you recommend? How would you get those?
What's that?
Which ones do you recommend? How would you get those?
Which coppers?
Yes.
Well, stronger ones can be sold from can be purchased from ag supply shops like, goodness, I'm drawing a blank here, Nutrient Ag Solutions or Howard or Helena. Kind of the next step up is like stuff like Badge and Coside. You can buy those online too. But anyway, and then there's ones that are even more than that, which I won't get into, but anyway, the bottom line is you don't want to just spray one thing if you're going to spray. You want to rotate products, because otherwise you get pathogen resistance that way. So I would encourage you, if you're going to spray to control anthracnose, if you're going to use a copper, use a non-copper fungicide in conjunction. So, yeah.
Have you ever heard of something called, it's a weird name, Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brood?
What's the second part of it?
Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brood.
Dead bug?
Brood.
Brew. No, what is it? What's in it? Do you know what the active ingredient is?
Spinosad.
Oh, it's a spinosad.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, spinosads are usually used to try to control larvae and stuff like that can happen in fruits. Since mangoes don't really get fruit fly here, I don't see much of a need to spray a spinosad. Now, if you're growing guava or if you're growing peaches or something, then a spinosad might, keep your fruit from getting maggots. But here we mostly have Caribbean fruit fly, and Caribbean fruit fly does not seem to attack mango unless it's damaged. But it doesn't usually pierce the skin the way medfly and oriental fruit fly can with mango. Fortunately, we don't have those here. So strictly speaking, with mango, I wouldn't really see a need to use a spinosad unless it was being required for import quarantine or something like that.
It was mostly recommended for citrus, for canker.
Leaf miner.
So that's why I'm curious.
Leaf miner or canker? Leaf miner and canker are two different things.
I'm sorry, leaf miner. So,
What-
leaf miner.
Oh, okay, right. All right. Canker is a fungal disease or a bacterial disease with citrus. Yeah.
Is using Southern Ag a waste of time?
Yes. I hope the Southern Ag people don't hate on me for that, though. Please be a sponsor.
Alex, the Mango Festival,
What
was that?
He asked if Southern Ag, I assume you're talking about the copper.
That's the most common one that.
The liquid copper? All right.
Yes, liquid copper.
Maybe in certain areas where the disease pressures aren't that high, it might make a difference. But in this day and age, I don't think it does. So that's just been my experience. Yeah.
the Facebook page is Florida Mango Festival, not Fest.
Yeah, Florida Mango Festival.
Yeah, you said Fest.
I did? All right, well, Florida Mango Festival, look that up on Facebook. Paul just corrected me. Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
Alex, you say now it's possible to spray copper and sulfur at the same time if you use the correct products. Can you please explain that a little more detail?
What do you mean? I mean, yeah, you can spray them at the same. Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, you need to check and make sure that there's compatibility with the product that you're, especially the copper product. Most of the coppers that I've used in the past had compatibility with sulfur. I never encountered a problem like a phytotoxic response or an issue with the leaves or flowers, for that matter, being damaged from combining the two. But you should still check, and make sure. You can always call the manufacturer and ask them that specific question, and a lot of times they'll have people that can answer that specifically. But most of the cover products I've used, and I've used a number of them and trialed a number of them, I had no issue with sulfur, wettable sulfur at least. So, yeah.
How do you spray sulfur? Sulfur doesn't dissolve in water, right?
Wettable sulfur does, but it doesn't stay in suspension. So if you're going to spray sulfur, you need to keep it agitated. You got to keep it mixed. And one of the mistakes that people make when they apply sulfur is they don't do that, and the sulfur sinks to the bottom of the tank, and then you're not getting an even application. Okay, so if you're going to use sulfur, you don't have to. Remember, there's other products you can use to control powdery mildew. You can use oil, which oil products stay suspended, and you don't have to mix them. Like there's a product called JMS stylet oil. It's just a food grade mineral oil, and that one you don't have to agitate it constantly. I mean, you should probably still agitate it, but like you don't have to do it constantly like you do with sulfur. So anyway.
If you mix some soap with it, would that help to kind of keep it in suspension?
No, it's not going to keep it suspended. To keep it suspended, you literally have to keep the solution mixed, like with on a good sprayer, an agitator, right? But like, if you're using like a 2-gallon or 1-gallon pump sprayer, you don't have an agitator most of the time, so you got to shake it. You got to physically shake it. I've done that before. Or if a backpack sprayer. Apparently, they make agitators for backpack sprayers now too. But like, when we're doing it, it's like a big 100-gallon tank, and we've got a built-in agitator to the tank, so that makes it easier. And I just keep it on the whole time, until the very end. Except when I'm putting fuel in the tank or whatever. But
And you can spray leaches at the same time. It's got good sulfur.
yeah. Well, I don't know how effective it is, but Rob was talking about what they were doing to the lychee trees, and it reminded me of when I was younger. And there was citrus all over Florida, and they were cutting down all the citrus trees to prevent citrus canker, and it made no difference. Citrus canker still took off, and then we ended up with greens. So when they tell you they have a solution for this stuff, always be a little skeptical. Anyway, so yeah.
One kind of off a little bit, but every year I go to the Caribbean Amazon, and they have massive mangoes like this. They don't have enough stress either through drought or cold to make them continue. They'll flower for like the 2 weeks of cold they'll get, and then it will just all drop off.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if like they're just planting seedlings. If you know of a species or variety, I know I've already brought them Casturi, and it's doing amazing. I just haven't seen it through fruiting yet.
Yeah.
But if you know of another species or variety that can handle.
Yeah. So they could try growing some of the other mangifera species like odorata, or because you already gave me Casturi. There's another one called lalijiwa that doesn't seem to get anthracnose, which I believe is a big problem for indica in Brazil in those areas. But there's other ones too. There's tons of mangifera species. Not all of them taste too good. I gotta be honest with you, but like if you're trying to get something like a mango in that sort of a humid environment where it's difficult for indica to fruit, then I suppose they're worth trialing. So there's things like Zelinica and Ruba patella, and there's a bunch of them. I just don't really like any of them, but I do grow a few kinds of Casturi and lalijiwa and odorata, and they fruit here. And but like that's not saying much, I suppose. But what I recall about them is they don't get any anthracnose. It's like they're naturally immune to it, which every indica can get anthracnose. I haven't met one yet that can't get it, So, yeah, worth trying. Yeah.
Casturi's doing super well.
Okay, cool. That's good to hear. At least they can get something.
What are some of the varieties that actually start fruiting in March?
Good question. So what varieties of mangoes can fruit in March? It's not a huge list, okay? And remember, it won't happen everywhere. So if you're watching this on YouTube or whatever, don't think that just because you get a rosy gold mango, you're going to get March fruit. But the varieties that can do it or have been able to do it consistently for us in West Palm Beach are rosy gold, Edward, Rosa, and dwarf Hawaiian. Those 4. And dwarf Hawaiian usually will have like April fruit, because it takes a little longer for its fruit to mature typically. But the other 3 have all carried fruit in March for us. And right now we have fruit on our Edwards and our are rosy golds that are going to be ready at the end of this month or before the end of this month. And that's from bloom that happened in December. So those varieties can fruit as long as their bloom isn't getting impacted by fungus. And the problem with these early blooming ones that would give you spring mangoes is that they're flowering when our days are really short and there's not as much time for the dew that settles on them in the morning to dry up. And so when people try to take like a rosy gold mango and grow it out in Waxahachie or Wellington where it's more humid than it is over by the coast, okay? They'll flower early, okay? But then they'll get anthracnose, inevitably. It always would happen, right? And if you were going to try to prevent that anthracnose on a rosy gold or a rosa or one of these, or an Edward, you'd probably have to spray it quite a bit. And you probably have to spray it with, stuff that you might not want to use. So, like, I usually tell people, like, don't expect spring mangoes from your trees unless you're, like, in coastal Miami-Dade, coastal Broward, Palm Beach. If you're in one of those places, you can grow a rosy gold would usually be my suggestion because I've had big spring crops from rosy golds, but you can try one of the other ones as well. Rosa is kind of disease prone even by the coast. But rosy gold will fruit okay even if you don't spray it. You can get some spring mangoes from it. Edward and dwarf Hawaiian will do it. It will usually, these mangoes will flower more than once. They'll flower up to 3 or 4 times even. So if you miss the spring window on your, rosy gold or your dwarf Hawaiian or whatever, it's going to flower again like the overwhelming majority of time, and eventually it's going to carry some fruit. So that's been our experience with these spring ones. But unless you're in a real good zone, I wouldn't plant one just for the spring fruit. I'd only plant it if you really liked that mango. So, Mike.
Of the fruit, what do you consider a better tasting mango? Because I've had the rosy gold at my place, and it tastes. I have a dwarf Hawaiian now. I think they're better.
My favorite of that group of 4 there that I just said, I guess it's a toss-up between the Edward and the dwarf Hawaiian. However, I will say I've had some very good rosy golds. Like I've had rosy golds that can hit in the 20s on bricks, the low 20s on good days. And I think part of it has to do with when they're fruiting. The issue with the real early ones sometimes, especially the ones that mature in March, is that they've been maturing their fruit when the weather is still pretty cool at night sometimes, and that absolutely will sap the bricks on mangoes. So cold weather when the fruit's developing will negatively impact the sweetness. Now, those rosy golds from that spring crop that ripen more towards the middle of April or even the end of April usually are quite good and are superior to the ones that we'll get in the last weeks of March. Rosy golds will usually have multiple crops and then they'll fruit again or they'll have fruit that's maturing again in June, like during regular mango season, right? And that's typically when people that are in the western communities will get their rosy gold fruit. And at that point in time, there's 2 things going on. One is that they're competing against all these other mangoes that taste awesome, many of which are just better than rosy gold. There's no way around it. And you're comparing a rosy gold to like, a lemon meringue or something. Rosy gold's not going to win. Rosy gold wins when it's the only mango in town or one of the only mangoes in town. But the other thing that happens is if it's raining a lot, then that, and rosy gold is maturing in June or July or whatever, it's not going to taste as good either. I find that the best rosy golds I've ever had were the ones that fruited and ripened in April. I've had really good ones in April. And it's nice and dry and it's already started to warm up. So, yeah.
What's a good nighttime temperature for getting good bricks?
The higher the better. If you can get nighttime temperatures in the upper 60s and above, let's say 68, 69 and above, 70s would probably be better. Then, and your daytime temperatures are high too. I need to throw that in there. So when the daytime highs are like in the 80s and upward, then it will usually result in the fruit achieving close to its, best eating quality. In certain conditions, if it's real dry and hot, the mangoes can taste extraordinarily sweet. Like in, for example, Southern California, the fruit that comes from Southern California in like October, November, that time period, is outrageously sweet. Sometimes they'll get bricks in the low 30s on certain varieties, which is just astronomical, right? But our best tasting fruit here will usually occur in periods of time where it's been very dry for several weeks and it's nice and hot. And if it's like that, the mangoes here will taste outstanding. And and we'll get periods of time in June or July sometimes where we go weeks without a drop of rain or not much. And that's when the mangoes typically taste the best. And or conversely, if it's raining a lot, their flavor is much more subdued, especially lots of overcast and rain for days and days. Unfortunately, the last 2 or 3 years, we've had like a week where there was a deluge in June or early July. And there's no question it impacted the flavor of the fruit. And some mangoes, they'll bounce back quickly. Like it's been raining a lot, and then they're tasting mild or weaker than they typically do. And then 3 days go by or so, it's been dry, and they're back to tasting normal. And then certain varieties, it screws them up for weeks. Like Pineapple Pleasure is one of my favorite mangoes. But if it's been raining, pouring for a week, Pineapple Pleasure is impacted for several weeks beyond when the rain stopped, which is unfortunate because when it's on, it tastes incredible. But there's no doubt in my mind that that's one variety whose flavor is impacted beyond just a few days after a lot of rain and overcast weather. It's kind of frustrating because we get good crops from our Pineapple Pleasure trees. And, yeah.
We've been in quite a drought recently. Should we be irrigating? How often should we irrigate with small mangoes on the tree?
Yeah, if you've got small mangoes on your trees, mangoes develop here during our so-called dry season. And it can get pretty dry, and if it's too dry, they'll feel that drought stress and they'll drop a lot of their little fruit, and it will impact how much fruit they end up carrying to maturity. So my recommendation is from the time that you see little fruit on the trees. Some might start when they're still in open bloom. It's a minor difference of opinion, but for the first 8 weeks of fruit development, measured from the time that you can see those little pea-sized fruit or so on there, you should be watering them at least several times a week to encourage retention. And a good deep water, you could probably water them every day and it probably wouldn't matter, especially here with our soil. But the idea is so that they don't feel as much drought stress, they don't drop as much fruit, and you only do it for about 8 weeks or so, okay? And then after that, they've usually reached a size where they're not going to drop very much fruit. Once they get beyond golf ball size, mangoes usually slow down the amount of abscission that they're experiencing, and most of that fruit should make it to maturity. And the thing is, you don't want to water them during the final month of maturity because water will impact the flavor in a negative way. And it's also going to increase the amount of humidity around the tree, which, can mean more disease, could mean more bacterial spot or anthracnose post-harvest. So it can also, too much can result in splitting. So we stop watering them after about 8 weeks of fruit development or so. It doesn't have to be too precise, but we definitely don't want to be watering them when they're ripening or maturing. So.
Do you find that Edward doesn't improve as well out west?
Yeah, so when I used to have a farm in Waxahachie for many years, and out there I trialed almost 100 different varieties out there. It was a long list. And I tried Edward because Edward did pretty well by the coast. We get a lot of fruit from our Edward trees in West Palm. And I had 5 Edward trees out there actually, and they were growing, I remember kind of on the south side of my property there. And I got fruit from them, but I didn't get much. And I could tell that they were a variety that was going to require a good bit of spraying out there to get success, and I didn't always, have time to do it. And I would say Edward is probably more of a coastal to mid-zone mango. You can grow it in the area we're in right now, which is not quite the coast, I guess, at this point. But once you get out to Royal Palm Beach or Wellington or Waxahachie, or if you're in Broward County, that would be Davie, Southwest Ranches, or Parkland, those areas I think are a little too humid for Edward, and luckily these days you have so many choices, so many great choices that you can skip the ones that have too many fungal issues under high humidity. So, as good as a mango Edward is, might leave that up to people that are closer to the coast to grow it, I guess.
So what would be some of the best mangoes to grow, like Wellington?
Yeah, sure. So what are some of the best mangoes to grow in like Wellington or Loxahatchee or whatever? So in humid areas, your list of options shrinks, right? Because there's too much stuff that gets anthracnose and disease out there compared to, further towards the ocean. So there's varieties, old varieties like Glen and Valencia Pride and stuff, and Floridon that will fruit well out there, but they're not the best tasting mangoes, right? So what are some of the best tasting varieties you can successfully grow out west? Sweet Tart, Ceci Love, Angie does pretty well out west. If you like that Indian Alfonso flavor, Angie does really well out west. You can get them to fruit without any spraying out there or anything. What are some other really good ones? Lemon Zest can fruit out there. Mahashanok, it depends on how you rate it. Like, to me, it's a decent mango, but it's not like elite tier. So, what's that? Sunrise, yeah. Sunrise is a very high quality Indian flavored mango. Again, if you like that strong Indian flavor, Sunrise can fruit in humid conditions without too much issue. So that's a good suggestion. Yeah, Pickering, again, it depends on where you rate it, but Pickering is a pretty good mango to most people's palates, and it fruits famously out there in the humid conditions of the western communities. I think probably Orange Sherbet, M4 among the newer varieties, those seem to fruit okay in the humid conditions, and those are really, really exceptional mangoes. So you can grow some really high quality stuff. You don't have to grow the old standbys, if you will, just because that those ones have good enough disease resistance to fruit out there. You have more options than you had 20 years ago, I'll put it that way. So anyway, yeah.
As far as when's the best time to pick your fruit?
When's the best time to pick it?
Like in the morning or in the afternoon?
Oh, that's a good question. I find that I seem to get more or see more fruit that's harvestable when I'm doing it in the afternoons. I think that has to do with just how the sun is hitting it. There's not as much dew on the fruit and stuff. So that would be my response to that. So I do sometimes have to harvest in the mornings. There's no choice, but I seem to find more in the afternoons, like around in our summers that would be like after 4 p.m. Like that's when I have the most success finding red fruit. Yeah.
I've been told that it actually has more sugar late in the afternoon as opposed to early in the morning.
Yeah, I don't know. That depends. Like, what happens if it rains in the afternoon and they soak up all that water? It might not, huh? I don't know if that's true or not. I'd have to test that. Yeah. By the way, something about flowering with mangoes that I always forget to bring up. Another thing that matters with bloom is stage of the moon. So stage of the moon matters. So when we're in a waxing gibbous stage, or gibbous, I don't know how to pronounce that, but that is when they're the most likely to flower, okay? Up until a full moon or so. They are more likely to respond to the bloom stimulus that's been occurring over several weeks or what have you during that time. That extra light from the moon, if you will, helps draw the buds out into the initiation. So, in case you were wondering if that had any impact on things, it does have some impact. So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned different strength of copper for spraying. What percentage you would say is a good strength to use?
What percentage?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Well, what percentage of product, of copper, sulfate, or whatever?
Totally depends on the product. It's not a one size fits all. It's going to come down to, because some of them have much different amounts of copper in them, And I can't just tell you a blanket statement, because if I did, you could apply way too much or too little. So pay attention to the label. Yeah, pay attention to what the manufacturer tells you with that specific product.
But I'm saying, once you make the product, do you know the percentage that you're applying?
Do I know the percentage that I'm applying? Absolutely.
Okay, and that's what I'm asking. What would be the percentage, let's say?
Of the product that I apply?
Right.
Like in terms of, because it's not,
Let's say the
it's
same.
not a liquid, so the one that I use, but it's measured by weight. So it's by like pounds
So when you say-
out of a 100-gallon tank. It comes out, there's a range. It depends on what you're targeting. And it depends on what the disease pressures are like. So if it's been raining a lot, we'll apply more, a higher rate. And if it's been dry, we'll apply less. And if we're trying to target anthracnose versus bacterial black spot, we'll apply less than for bacterial spot. But I'm not going to explain my entire spray protocol to you right now, if that's what you're hoping.
No, I was just...
It's okay. Come on.
My
Yeah.
property happens to be on a very well-lit street that they put LEDs on, they're really bright. And they're on 24 hours, I mean, they're on all night long.
Yeah.
How can that affect my bloom?
I don't know. That's a good question, because obviously there's people that grow mangoes under lights in areas where they don't get enough light. You know, especially if they're growing them in like greenhouses or something, and they're zone pushing, if you will, and they flower. You know, so like how much will that light impact? I'm not sure. You know, versus the moonlight and just the amount of sunlight they're receiving. I won't rule it out as being a possible, you know, factor, but I can't say for sure how much of a difference it would make.
It
So.
definitely affects my chickens.
Oh, it affects your chickens, okay.
It definitely does.
Okay.
They lay more eggs, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good for you. All right. All right. Any other mango questions or issues or whatever? Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is different from your, but you sell basically right off the trees almost. I take them up north to sell, so I have to pick them before they start turning color. And usually I decide they're ready based on if a bunch of other ones are ripening and falling, I say, okay, the rest of them are ready.
Yeah.
But if I have a split flowering in summer earlier and summer later, I have a hard time telling which ones are earlier and which ones are
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, so because when you get multiple blooms on your trees, you've got fruit that's at different stages of maturity, and it can be tricky. And sometimes requires a little bit of memorization in terms of which section of the canopies bloomed first. But certain varieties are easier to tell the maturity on than others. One of the things you can look for on a lot of mangoes, aside from the stem drying out, is, and turning kind of woody, is it bleeding clear or is it bleeding white? You know, like if they're bleeding clear, the vast majority of mangoes are pretty close to maturity. Now you can pick some and they'll bleed white and they'll still ripen no problem, okay? But that's one thing you can look at. Another thing is, it depends on the variety, but we say the shoulders of the mango will start to fill out a little bit more. They're not as sloping. Another really good cue is you'll see little crystals of sap form on the skin. And if you see that, that's a very good indication that the fruit is mature enough to harvest. And then beyond that, I mean, what you said in terms of like picking them when a lot of them are starting to ripen, you can certainly do that. I kind of call that blind picking. You're gonna pick some stuff that's not, you know, fully mature if you do that. Up until about the last third or so of the season for that variety. At that point, you can pick almost anything and it should ripen properly. But with certain varieties, that can be tricky, especially ones with real long seasons. Like, there's a few we grow that have very extended seasons, like Dot has a very long season. And if I blind pick Dot, I'm gonna pick some of them way too soon, and then the customer's not gonna enjoy the fruit. You know, if you're picking them for yourself at home, that's one thing, but if you're selling them to people, it's a different matter, and you want them to have the best experience possible. You want them to taste that mango the way it's supposed to. So you have to be careful when you're selling fruit about how you harvest them. You have to learn the nuances of every variety, because some of them don't tree ripen well and have to be picked green if you want them to taste good, and some of them don't taste that good when they're picked green and are optimally allowed to tree ripen. You know, if you can, let them do so. Like the Kerry mango, for example, is better in my opinion, and the opinion I think of most, if it's allowed to tree ripen, but if you let it drop off the tree, it's ruined. So, and then, you know, I just mentioned the dot mango, it's real long season. That mango, if you allow it to tree ripen, gets musky and gross, and optimally is picked as soon as it starts to change any color at all and ripened off the tree. And there's some mangoes that just taste vile if they're allowed to tree ripen. You know, like Malika can taste that way if it's allowed to tree ripen a lot of the time, and Alfonso can taste that way. Speaking of Alfonso, there's one Zill hybrid called the Super Alfonso, where if it's allowed to tree ripen, it can be kind of nasty, but if you allow it to ripen over the course of a week, it tastes awesome. So lots of nuance with mangoes when it comes to harvesting them, and you have to, sometimes you can ask people, you know, and they can relate their experience, but a lot of times that information is not available to you, and you have to learn by trial and error, and that might require you to take some notes, might require you to take a picture of when you picked it, or write on the fruit what day you picked it, so that you remember it, and you realized, okay, I picked this on whatever day, and it didn't ripen properly, it shriveled up, and I picked it too green, you know, so next time I'll wait a little longer to pick it, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you need to fertilize mangoes, or is there any other natural?
Do you need to? Not necessarily. You know, some people, a lot of the mango trees you see that are doing really well and fruiting in people's yards aren't necessarily receiving anything. Can you optimize performance with fertilization? Sure. And there's different ways to do that. There's a school of thought that you shouldn't give any nitrogen fertilizer to mango trees at all. I think it's okay to give them a little nitrogen the first couple of years when they're small and you're trying to get them to get to a size where they are fruiting. A little bit of NPK, whatever kind you use, whether it's an organic one or a synthetic one, will help get the canopy developed and in a position that it can fruit. One of the goals of any person that's growing mangoes is to not just to get it to fruit, but to get it to fruit when it's young, because it helps control the tree's size. Fruiting trees aren't usually growing while they're fruiting. And that, in the end, is a big difference maker for trying to keep, especially vigorous varieties, at a manageable height. So I like to give them a little bit of NPK when they're getting started, and I'll give them some mulch and compost to help them out a bit as well. But once they get to fruiting size, which is usually pretty quick with mango trees in South Florida, it's usually within 2 or 3 years, even if they're like a 1-gallon tree when you've planted them. I usually cut nitrogen out entirely at that point, cold turkey, and I just give them potassium and micronutrients like trace elements, because a lot of times our soil down here doesn't have a lot of certain trace elements, especially like manganese and boron are really deficient down here. Like there's like almost no boron in our soil here in South Florida, or at least over in this section of the woods. Also, we a lot of times don't have much potassium in our soil either. And potassium is really important for fruit development and long-term productivity. So, certainly I feel it's beneficial to give them some potassium even when they're big. So, yeah.
So, quick one.
Yes.
Quick comment. NPK, right? Nitrogen.
Phosphorus and potassium, yeah.
So the shortcut to remember what they do: shoots, roots, and fruit. That's what the 3 elements do. So the shoots are the leaves, the middle number supposedly is to help with the root development, and the last number is for the fruit or flowers, depending on what you do. So
They all have multiple functions.
Yeah, they all have multiple functions, and you know, if you want to really make your tree grow a lot, Maybe you want to turn it into a shade tree, you can feed it a lot of nitrogen and it will grow. But the curious thing about mangoes, okay, and this is just one of those happenstances of biology, amongst fruit trees, they are perhaps one of the most sensitive to nitrogen, and they require the least amount of it to be happy. For perspective, the ideal leaf nitrogen percentage on a mango, depending on what study you look at, is around 1%. Some even say slightly less than that, some will say slightly more, but very few, if any, will say like over 1.3%. Okay, so for context, like an avocado is several times that. Okay, and the same goes for various other fruit trees, sapodillas, mamey, whatever. Bananas, it's like 10 times that. So mangoes are on this super low end of the threshold for requiring nitrogen, and they're very good at finding it and using it. And so once you get to a certain size, too much of it just makes them want to grow at the expense of fruiting, and it negatively impacts fruit quality, and it results in more disease. So some of the most diseased mango trees I've ever seen were trees that would be being fed way too much, nitrogen fertilizer. And so it's got its downsides. When you're trying to get the canopy established, a little bit's okay, but some people grow it totally without it. Like I think Richard Campbell grows his without any, traditional NPK, and they grow slower and might take longer to get good, productive results, but it can be done.
One more question.
Yeah.
So, do you recommend any other plants, what I can plant under the mango tree?
Oh yeah, you can grow, we grow perennial peanut underneath our mango trees. We love perennial peanut. It does, but it doesn't put that much into the tree. And that was actually something we thought about, because it's a nitrogen fixer, that's right. But it's a great ground cover. But I've seen people like growing all kinds of stuff underneath them. It just comes down to like how much humidity are you willing to tolerate? Because some of the permacultural farms will have, all sorts of stuff growing underneath them and next to them. The issue is that when you get too much humidity under your trees, and the more vegetation you have under them, the more humidity you're going to have. You might get more disease, so of certain kinds. Other more fungal resistant varieties will tolerate having other things growing close by or underneath them. Obviously mango trees can cast a lot of shade as they grow, so if you're going to try to grow something underneath them as they get bigger, it needs to be something that tolerates shade, right? So, but yeah, otherwise they get along pretty well with other plants growing nearby them in terms of a health kind of thing, so. Yeah.
So on the potassium, how often do you, and how long do you do that for the fruit mango?
So typically if you're going to apply potassium, in my opinion with mangoes, the optimal times are the fall or early winter. So like October, November, December, that time period you make an application. And then another application is in the spring. So the fall application is to influence what's coming, the bloom, right? Hopefully. And the initial fruit set and that's associated with it. But then you've got the development of the fruit, right? And they need potassium for that as well. And so that spring application in March, April, usually is when we do it, that's going to influence the quality of the fruit, the size of the fruit, the firmness of the fruit, and the color. Potassium will make mangoes red or more orange or whatever. So you'll get more brilliantly colored mangoes from potassium as well. Yeah.
Rob, why don't you do the last question?
I'll do the last one. Okay. What's your favorite form of potassium?
Potassium sulfate. So the issue is that there is lots of different types of potassium, and some of them can burn, like the muriate will burn them if you apply it too much. So potassium sulfate is pretty good about not burning mango trees. It's available, like you can get it, but you can't necessarily get it at like Home Depot or Lowe's. You might have to go to like an ag supply shop, like one of the ones I just described, or you can order it online. And there's lots of organic forms of it. There's one that I used called Alganic, I think. And I think that was sold by Howard. It comes in like 50-pound bags. The issue is finding potassium fertilizers that are granulated. Most of them are soluble. The one, the RFC that Har came up with is pretty good. that's a lower number of potassium, I think, because like traditionally, like the ones that you'll get at an ag supply shop are like a 0050 or 52, or something like that. But that one has minor elements, right? The problem with potassium fertilizers that you get from an ag supply shop is it'll have like no trace elements. It's just potassium and some sulfur, and that's it. So you have to add the trace elements some other way. So the perfect one would have the trace elements like iron, zinc, manganese, boron, molybdenum, stuff like that. So, but you might not be able to get that, and that's okay. You can add those things through other methods. So, okay. Good.
All right, well, Alex.
Thank you very much, everybody. One last plug. My company is Tropical Acres Farms. We're in West Palm. If you want to come visit us sometime during mango season, we're open by appointment right now for tree sales, but we will have fruit available in the not too distant future. And if you buy a tree from us, I like to give people some fruit too. So take that into consideration if you're looking for a mango tree. I hope I see you all during mango season and at Mango Festival 2020.